What is up, everybody? I'm NoLucksGiven here with your afternoon snap, and today is the final day of the season, so I've got a bunch of content to cover with this one. First, we're going to take a look at a gold conquest playing Big Zabu, the deck that I showcased yesterday, and then I'm also going to take a look at an Infinity Conquest run that I played with a different deck that is maybe a little bit more competitive, but I actually think the Gold Conquest games are more fun. So we're gonna start with that, but if you wanna skip ahead and see like what my actual pick is for my top deck right now, feel free to skip ahead, but I do like Big Zabu as well, and I mentioned yesterday that if I had some fun Conquest games, I would show those off as well. So that's what we're getting into in this video. And to kick off the first game, I've got both Zabu and Blade, which I don't know if I talked about this in yesterday's video, but these are both two of the top most played cards right now, and it was kind of what pushed me towards playing this deck. My opponent is playing Loki, but this Ghost Rider draw off the top here is enough to make me snap. Alongside this Isle of Silence. Isle of Silence is doing a lot of work here because we've got Red Skull that we can throw into that location, and because of that, I'm gonna throw Ghost Rider into the Vault because I don't want my Giganto, if I play it in Strange Academy, to land alongside the Red Skull, and I know that next turn I'm just gonna be playing Red Skull to Isle of Silence, so I won't have another opportunity to play things into the Vault. So this kind of shows my hand and represents that I'm looking to put 22 power in the Vault, but I felt like getting the most power on the board in the most appropriate ways and not just having a whole bunch of power in Isle of Silence, I thought that that outweighed the potential negatives of playing like this. My opponent actually isn't going to punish me that bad. They're going to play Agent Coulson into the Vault, so they tie it up there for 22, and then they Lockjaw Snowguard to find Miss Marvel, but now Miss Marvel is going to flop over into Isle of Silence, so that's not really a horrible outcome for me here, and we move into the last turn tied 22 apiece in the Vault and 14 apiece in Isle of Silence. Interestingly, my opponent does currently have Snowguard Hawk form to turn off Isle of Silence, but Isle of Silence will turn back on again, turning off Red Skull and Miss Marvel for the end game calculation. So it's not really like a huge thing to worry about, but you could worry about the fact that they've got a bunch of cheap cards fueled out by Quinjet, Zabu, and Loki. So they could potentially have some nice power here. We're going to Jubilee into Lady Sif, discarding Infinaut, and then play Black Knight plus a cheap Skaar over into the Isle. My opponent plays a Jubilee on Iron Lad, which gives us a Gladiator, and that is going to reveal a Dracula, which unfortunately will get destroyed. But I could have won this game if my cards had just been in like a slightly different order. Like I said, the Hawk is not going to be too big of a deal, and then my opponent's last card might be Bear form, might just be something else. Oh, that's right, the game kind of lags here for a little bit as Hawk disables a disable, so I think that kind of messed up the game because now there's a lot of weird calculations. Red Skull has to temporarily turn on, Mrs. Marvel has to turn on but then turn off again because there's two 4s in the center, and then Lockjaw has to activate and find Gladiator again, which then destroys my Lockjaw. But what is really crazy about this game is ultimately, after Isle of Silence turns back on, is I'm going to be winning by 5 in Isle of Silence, and my opponent is going to win by 5 in Strange Academy, so it's a tie. No cubes exchanged. Crazy way to start off a series, but I thought this was a fun one, and it's a good match. I've not played around too much Loki in a little bit. In theory, I think a deck like this can be good against Loki. There's a few cards that kind of flip the paradigm on Loki, namely Jubilee and Lockjaw accessing cards from your deck. Same way that like giving a Loki a Blob is not nearly as impressive as a Blob player playing a Blob because their deck is built to take advantage of that. Also playing synergistic cards, Ghost Rider, discard, all pretty good because your opponent might not have as many of the combo pieces as you, which then allows you to gain an advantage. One thing that is a little bit awkward though, we're playing a Zabu deck, and my opponent also has access to Zabu and wants to be playing Zabu. They've got Iron Lad, they've got Loki, but it just means like they might have Zabu in their opening hand and then Loki me and then have a bunch of like extremely cheap cards. So there's a few ways for my opponent to get an advantage here as well. But Zabu plus Blade, great opening start. So I feel like I almost started to bring up this point and then talked over it, but both of these are like really well represented cards in the metagame right now. And one thing that I thought was interesting, so I did tournament coverage this past week for both of the Community Gaming Latin America and Community Gaming SEA tournaments, and everyone played a different deck. There were 7 different decks represented in the top 4 of both of those events, with one player, Yampel, being in the top 4 of both of them. So Yampel played the same deck, but other than that, there were 7 different decks. Among all of those decks, there were 14 cards that appeared more than once. 12 cards appeared exactly twice, and Zabu and Blade both appeared 3 times each. It's a lot of nerdy stuff just to say, hey, these cards are good. A lot of people are playing them. So I think that is pretty cool to think about. This turn, I am throwing out the Red Skull into Sewer System. So Red Skull is cool in terms of being able to just like curve out. It fits a nice spot on the curve, but then it also allows you to potentially play Skaar as well. So that is what justifies it in the deck. And then of course, if you discard it to Dracula or make it into an Ebony Blade, it's just as big as Giganto. So there's a couple other cool synergies going on in the deck. I don't think we'll actually get to utilize the Skaar here because Skaar does not get further discounted by Zabu. That would be crazy if you had a card in play that made Skaar cheaper. If it then got discounted by Zabu, that would be a little bit nuts. But we are going to be able to Ghost Rider back the Giganto and then Jubilee and fish for something else big in our deck. Hopefully, or wait, no, we're Ghost Ridering the Infinaut and we're Jubileeing for Giganto right now. It could either be Giganto or it could be Black Knight. So it's a big 50-50 here. My opponent flips over a Giganto. It's basically a 50-50 whether or not we win or lose the game at this point, which I definitely think is worth playing for. Unfortunately, we missed that 50-50 and then Dracula discards Lady Sif. The Dracula part didn't actually matter because my opponent had a Dracula too to discard their Red Skull, showing off our synergies better than we are, which is always the awkward part about playing up against a Loki deck. And one thing, so I think it would be antithetical. I think that's the word. I think that it wouldn't be, well, where am I coming up with these big words? I wanted to say congruent now. I don't think it would track with Loki being the god of chaos if you got to see the cards that Loki gave you. But it's definitely awkward playing up against a Loki deck and like having to kind of play up against your own expected power output, but not knowing which cards they took from you. And yeah, there's definitely still some awkward things there that can lead to a little bit of a feel bad. I already snapped on turn 1 because I had the Blade and I had all of my big cards in my deck. So I thought this was a really good setup because I realized whenever I draw a big card, I could play the Blade, discard it to Black Knight. If I don't draw a big card, then I can use Zabu plus Jubilee, and I'm pretty likely to hit one of my big cards. So I was feeling pretty good about how this game started off, and then Sinister London popped up. I am kind of getting big over in White Hot Room, or I'm sorry, I'm like getting close to filling the White Hot Room, so that part is a little bit awkward. But I think it's going to be okay because if we fill White Hot Room, then we've got a bunch of extra energy to cast our big cards. We won't be able to cast Giganto. So that is a little bit of an awkward thing going on here, but maybe we can find like Dracula or something later on to discard it. Dracula is a great card to throw in White Hot Room, but I would not scoff at a 20 power Ebony Blade either. My opponent's going to play a Miss Marvel, which is like 14 power for the same amount of energy, but Miss Marvel's a lot harder to utilize in a Sinister London game. So don't feel bad about how this game has transpired so far. Red Skull is basically like a 5-6 that is sometimes better than that and also has the upside of discounting your Skaar. And it also almost has the upside here of giving my opponent the Red Skull ability off of Rogue. That would have been a really crazy hit, but unfortunately I missed. And the fact that my opponent wanted to rogue my Ebony Blade kind of telegraphs Shang-Chi, but I don't think I'm going to play around that. Ultimately, I decide to stay in it here because I feel like there's so many times against a Loki deck where you just have to retreat that I was willing to take my chances, hope that they don't have Shang-Chi, and hope that we were able to put it together. And they don't have Shang-Chi, but they do have Lockjaw and Iron Lad. Iron Lad misses, but then the Lockjaw does actually find the Shang-Chi, but it doesn't matter because the Shang-Chi is then not going to get duplicated over into Vibranium Mines, which now means that I win this game on differential because I just have so much power over in Vibranium Mines. This was a crazy game, but yeah, just a crazy match overall. A lot of like ties popping up where my opponent is not afraid to tie me in this game in White Hot Room. They tie me for 12, a little bit of randomness there with Sinister London. But just a crazy final turn that had me on like a roller coaster there, thinking I won, potentially, then thinking I lost, and then thinking that I won again. Great Portal gives me Skaar, which is absolutely fantastic because it's a card that this deck already plays, so definitely not going to scoff at that. And then game giveth, game taketh away. It's going to Sokovia and discard my Skaar, which is a little bit awkward. It's not the best card to reanimate with Ghost Rider. I'd much rather reanimate like the Red Skull and then have a cheaper Skaar, but I'm also just happy enough to see Sokovia against a Loki deck. It's not going to be super impactful as my opponent is able to restock their hand here with Snowguard, but just like any amount of discard hitting my opponent, I feel like is a pretty solid thing for me, and I felt like I had a good curve beyond that here, which then immediately gets disrupted by Mobius. This deck is like, it part of the reason I'm showcasing this game as well is just because like how much tech my opponent has for me. They've got Loki to steal everything that I'm potentially trying to do and then maybe even do it better and cheaper. And then they've got Mobius to shut off my Zabu and my Skaar, and Rogue to, I guess Rogue isn't that big of a deal, but they have it, and that allowed them to turn off my Ebony Blade and Shang-Chi me. So it seems like a lot is going on here with this one. I'm gonna Red Skull into negative zone. Kind of an awkward way to kind of like mitigate that location for my opponent, but it's one card that can then win the location, and it seemed like a smart place to be. I'm currently battling for all 3 locations. My opponent can Shang-Chi me in one spot if they've drawn it, but otherwise they're going to have to battle across the board here, and now I just have to figure out what lanes is my opponent potentially going to play for. Where do I potentially need a little bit more power? I think it makes a lot of sense for my opponent to play another card into negative zone to flip that location, and because I already have a huge lead in Sokovia, I feel like playing Blade there might make a lot of sense, though I also feel like Shang-Chi is if they have Shang-Chi, then they would play that to Sokovia. They could just as easily play that to Skaar, to the Great Portal. But this is really just a 50-50 read, and just trying to get a little bit more power to play around other things. And I feel like the only way they take Sokovia is with Shang-Chi, whereas Great Portal, they could potentially have something else to take that location. Hopefully that all makes sense. I was talking about a lot of ideas there really quick. My opponent's just going to retreat. So I did kind of have them covered from every angle. If anything, I think that this video is like, because in yesterday's video, I just played 2 random games. I didn't really look at curated games, and not that these games are curated, it's just 2 random conquests that I played, though 2 highlighted conquest games that I played. You are getting to see a more rounded version of the deck. You're getting to see Red Skull shine. You're getting to see just some of the other interactions come into play a little bit more. I can use Blade to discard Skaar here. That's not terrible. And I think I will wind up going for it just because the curve looks a little bit awkward otherwise. So we'll get that Skaar out of the hand. Miss Marvel is basically protecting the Red Skull until super late in the game. And yeah, I just want to start playing out some of my cards here. So we draw a Giganto. Yeah, I guess it's a little bit of a punish. Mobius is going to mean that like keeping Skaar in hand isn't super important. And then the fact that I draw the Black Knight here also makes playing the Blade a little bit of a punish, but I've got a whole bunch of other 4-cost cards that I want to play and they're not getting any cheaper. So I'm going to have to play those out at full cost, and Blade might have been tough to weave in this curve regardless. My opponent Iron Lads into Devil Dinosaur, which is a huge, huge card. So that's unfortunate. Miss Marvel is also a lot of power, but yeah, they just played a 419, and now they get to follow that up with like a 516 effectively this turn. I guess it'll be a 514 in Grand Central, and then Grand Central throw in something else. So yeah, not the best spot for me. My opponent snaps, but I'm going to stay in it. They don't have Loki, and it seems like they're just going to like play Devil Dinosaur or something here, and maybe I can beat a draw like this. I feel like Grand Central kind of favors me when I am playing Black Knight this turn, because it either could have hit Jubilee, Red Skull, or Giganto, or it could hit Zabu. So it's a little bit unfortunate that I got the worst possible roll out of that scenario. And now for the final turn, there are like a little bit of mind games, I would say, because we're kind of tied in White Palace and in Grand Central. And I think about playing Jubilee into White Palace just to make sure I win that location in case my opponent also tries to battle for that location. But then I realized they're probably just going to play Miss Marvel this turn, so I do need to put a little bit more power in the center just to make sure that I stay winning there. They play Miss Marvel plus Zabu. Jubilee, though, is going to give me a Lady Sif, which is just enough to take Grand Central, and then Dracula just has to hit this 2 out of 3 to discard a 14 power card, and it does. It discards the Ebony Blade, so we are able to get the win. That was a really sweet one. A lot of back and forths, and I think pretty close overall. It always feels sweaty when you have to play up against Loki, and it always feels good to get the W. I also wanted to take a look at the Infinite Conquest that I played this season, and this was the Infinite Conquest that I played this season. I only played this one. I've mostly been playing ranked the past 2 seasons, but I did not win a single gold conquest all season, and my only Infinite ticket came from the metal shop. I had to buy it, but I mean, you get like the free one. I didn't spend actual currency on it, and that meant that this was my only shot. So I decided to play Blob, Thanos, Lockjaw. I think it's still a really good deck despite the nerf to Lockjaw. Unfortunately, in this first game, I get a little bit unlucky, but it was only for 1 cube. So I thought it was fine to stay in it here, but we pull over the Venom, and the Wolverine also landed over in Morag. I actually could have just won this game with Shang-Chi, so that part is a little bit awkward. But unfortunately, we are going to start it off by losing 2 cubes, but we'll get them back. We're going to do this. There's still some time left on this video. One thing that I've personally felt for a little bit now is that Gold Conquest is potentially harder than Infinite Conquest. That's only my personal experience, but Infinite Conquest, there is a special thing about it because there are less people able to play in Infinite Conquest. There's less infinite tickets than there are gold tickets. It means you can match against anyone regardless of collection level or hidden rating, which means that the field is potentially softer. You can play against like brand new players in Infinite Conquest, whereas Gold Conquest, you're just like rarely going to get matched up against them, but the Infinite Conquest doesn't really have a choice. So that's kind of an interesting kind of like just fact about Infinite Conquest, and why it oftentimes leads to like less exciting games. Also, Infinite Conquest is like the last week of the season, so people don't always have the time to be able to like really buckle down and try hard and play their best games and focus on the Infinity tickets. Whereas like for the gold, I guess like you have more time in those first 3 weeks of the season. And with that, people might like care more or concentrate more on the actual games. There's also the fact that we are now post OTA. So that like led to a metagame shakeup and just like more uncertainty of what to play overall. But all of that is just to say, you know, here we are in the Infinite Conquest, and with a Subterranea game, I felt like it was fine to just snap on Mind Stone. So we're playing this one here for 4 cubes. I play down Vision, should have played Vision into Fisk Tower because I can't move the Vision into Fisk Tower, but I am going to make up for that here by realizing that right before I play the Jeff and play the Jeff into Fisk Tower. So it's a little bit awkward, and it might actually cost me that Vision has less mobility than it otherwise might in a normal game. But also don't have a great play this turn. All I can really do is play Time Stone. No real incentive to play these rocks out either, and it doesn't seem like my opponent has got a great play. They're just going to play X-23 and Deadpool, and they already used their Killmonger to blow up a bunch of my stuff. Turn 6 now, and I have 7 energy. I could play Reality Stone plus Skaar. The thing is, that's like not a great play for me though, and I feel like using Reality Stone to turn off Fisk Tower might actually give me more opportunities. I can move the Vision over into the location where I'm definitely going to be winning, and that tosses priority to allow me to Shang-Chi on the final turn as well. So not really a great game for me, but and then I draw another rock. I draw the 4th out of 5 rocks, but I think I'm going to stay in it here. I can move Vision over into Cloning Vats, and then I can have 9 power at that location after I move Jeff out. Shang-Chi battles for Subterranea 4-3, and then I'm just putting all of my power into Limbo for a total of 16 against their 10. And this is potentially the most awkward part about this video, and why I did not start the video by talking about an Infinite Conquest, which is like infinitely more exciting. My opponent just kind of gives up here. They play 3 rocks on the final turn. I guess that's to say like, hey, look how unlucky I got. I drew all these rocks. Boo-hoo is me. I also got pretty unlucky. I mean, I drew 2 of my rocks off of Mind Stone, so maybe I got less unlucky in that capacity, but I think this was my opponent just saying like, I got unlucky, there was nothing I could do, and I'm just gonna throw in 8 cubes rather than retreat. I'm really not sure. This next game ends with my opponent flipping over a Killmonger to pump up a Null, and it gives Null a lot of power here. Hits a big ol' X-23 and then my Soul Stone, both that were pumped by Wakandan Embassy, and then Hulkbuster onto Killmonger, just going to give them a little bit more power there. I wasn't sure what to play around on this turn, and I ultimately decided to play Blob and Vision to 2 separate locations. I was thinking like Arnim Zola in some capacity might be what's coming out for my opponent, and by playing to both locations, I kind of play around Arnim Zola. Turns out I get punished, losing 19-20. Professor X did get me the win in the Ruins though. And then the final game, my opponent plays a Dr. Octopus from Great Portal, and that grabs my Shang-Chi. And that's basically all she wrote. It gives me Shang-Chi and Vision, so I win this location and then also get to battle for another location from their Dr. Octopus. And yeah, they just can't come back from that. In this next match, I use Reality Stone to kind of try to grief my opponent, try to give them like more things that might fill up their first location. What I kind of underestimated here is the fact that Space Throne is also not a great location for my deck, and I wind up running out of room actually much faster than my opponent does, and with this Living Tribunal that they flip over out of Jubilee, it just gets really awkward for then me to even be able to win the Space Throne or win the game at all. So, awkward. So I retreat out of that game, but a well-timed Professor X in game 2 stops a Jubilee and leaves my opponent only with deep space and no option but to retreat. And both of those things kind of build into a really interesting third game here, where like we both have a decent amount of information about each other's decks. And yeah, this is just a fun one. So our first location is Mojo World. We're off to a pretty good start. Decks can fill up Mojo World as well, but we can just fill it up so much easier with all of our stones, so that seems good to me. My opponent discards Black Cat on turn 1, then I get Lake Hellas on turn 2, which also seems like a pretty good location for me, and I'm going to kick this game off with a Jeff into Mojo World, a little bit of flexibility, but Jeff is like probably going to wind up staying in Mojo World. And don't want to play Psylocke because I can't curve into Cull Obsidian next turn regardless. And then turn 3 we get Rickety Bridge, which is a pretty good location for me if I draw Caiera or Professor X. And with the other 2 locations, I'm feeling good. So I snap. And I think what's interesting about that snap is it telegraphs that I have something for the Rickety Bridge, right? So my opponent snaps back, which I think is really, really interesting because they're thinking, oh, NoLux probably has the Professor X. And now I do, but I didn't a second ago when I snapped, and they snapped back, which now kind of indicates that they have an answer to the Professor X. Some really weird mind games going on here, but also, I don't need to play the Professor this turn. I'm just thinking about my curve, and I'm thinking I've got 6 energy this turn, and I want to make use of it. Next turn, I will have 5 energy. I also like making Skaar cheaper by playing Blob this turn. If I didn't draw Skaar, I'm not sure I would have made this play. I might have got by Dracula into Rickety Bridge. Really heads up play by my opponent there. Professor X also, though, makes a lot of sense into Mojo World. So it's kind of like I could have just played Professor into Mojo World this turn, and then I do still have access to Caiera. So I'm going to play Cull Obsidian this turn, and then next turn I can play Caiera plus Skaar into Rickety Bridge, and that should be pretty fantastic. But then my opponent discards Living Tribunal off of Lady Sif and a Magneto, but Living Tribunal is really, really interesting here, because it means that my opponent, sorry, I'm like getting a little bit, I've got a bunch of ideas in my head. The fact that they have the Living Tribunal means that I need to battle for Mojo World, because if I lose Mojo World and they have Living Tribunal, they will split that 100 power over all 3 locations and actually win against me. So I've got to pause this here because there's actually so much going on this final screenshot. So the fact that I played for Mojo World means that they didn't have that plus 33 power in every location. But then the fact that I didn't play the Professor and stranded their Dracula in the Rickety Bridge meant that my opponent was kind of in a precarious situation here. I wind up like double beating them. I'm beating them initially, and then I wind up destroying their Living Tribunal and then beating them again. It's actually a lot closer once their Living Tribunal dies though, which is funny. Then it comes down to differential, where they're beating me by 6. I'm beating them by 20. Still a really great game and good sport for my opponent there as well. This might be the most interesting match in this series, at least in this Infinite run. We get District X, which I just think is always a lot of fun. I kind of snap here because District X is fun. To me, it's kind of like the ego of Marvel Snap. I probably should not have snapped here, at least until I got a little bit more information. I do get Reality Stone though, which I do somewhat like. The ability to just draw additional cards and have more options out of District X I think is cool. I don't think it was probably snap worthy, but then I find Quantum Tunnel, and now I get to throw Power Stone into Quantum Tunnel, so that seems really sweet, and it gives me magic, which then turns off the Quantum Tunnel for my opponent. I didn't get great value out of it, but my opponent doesn't get any value out of it with their Domino that they play. And then I draw Power Stone again, keep drawing this card, and decide just to play Sebastian Shaw into Monster Metropolis, curving out here as much as possible. but I figured maybe I'll find a way to pump up the Seabass, and then we'll get additional power into Monster Metropolis. Seabass only pumps up off of permanent power increases, so an ongoing ability like Monster Metrop is not going to actually give him additional stats from his own ability. My opponent has a really cool play here, Martyr into Venom to eat that Martyr. I thought that was really cool. And a Thor into Hellfire Club is actually kind of a threat as well. They're also currently winning in Monster Metropolis. And then I get to do kind of a funky play here this turn. There's actually, so there's a few things going on right now. Partially, I want to, so I realize I can Blade and discard this X-23. That might be cool. I'm also realizing I can Blade and discard this Hell Carrier, and that will fill my hand with a bunch of random stuff. And then there is also like another, yeah, I think that this is ultimately what I have to go for. It's just too sweet not to do. It'll give me a lot of options. And I kind of want to hang on to the Shang-Chi and not kill the Venom immediately, so that way I can Shang-Chi whatever my opponent has there on the final turn. So that's all the thoughts going through my head. A lot of things to consider here in a crazy District X game, where then I get a whole bunch of cards additionally, and then could even Loki. And I probably should Loki here. The problem with Loki here is there's only one more turn in the game, so I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to make use of this Loki. And I realize my opponent is probably playing Destroy. They haven't showed me too many cards from the deck, but they have showed me a Venom. Loki's kind of interesting just to get more info as we go into the rest of the match, and for that reason, it potentially could have been right. I'm also eyeing up that, like, I kind of want to Shang-Chi their Venom, and then next turn, maybe like Rock Slide plus Sentry. Something like that could be cool. And if I want to play Rock Slide plus Sentry next turn, Sentry after I've filled up Monster Metropolis is the main idea there. Then I can't Shang-Chi them on the final turn. I have to Shang-Chi them on this turn. So a lot of different ideas brewing. This is only turn 6, so yeah, like I said, maybe could have just played the Loki. My opponent plays the Null into Limbo, and now I'm kind of boned here, unfortunately. You don't know if they're going to have the Null in a District X game, but now I've basically guaranteed lost Monster Metropolis to anything that they play there, and there's no opportunity for me to grab the win back in Limbo because their Null just absorbed all the power from their Venom. So this is, I'm going to look at this board for a little bit longer, but it is a lost game. So after that retreat, we find ourselves here, and my opponent snapped on, I think, turn 1 because of Onslaught Citadel. Then they got access to Rickety Bridge, but they didn't really play for it. They haven't played a second card to Rickety Bridge, just using Venom to eat up a bunch of power over in Washington, D.C. as I develop a Lockjaw. And this actually gives me an opportunity here to Reality Stone the Rickety Bridge and then Shang-Chi my opponent's Venom. I know that this Shang-Chi plan on the penultimate turn did not work out for me on the previous game. So I think about like not doing that as well and just going for like Time Stone this turn and then like hanging on to the Power Stone, and now next turn I could play like Power Stone plus Shang-Chi in some capacity. So that's what I divert to doing. My opponent plays Negasonic Teenage Warhead to protect their Venom, though. It doesn't really protect their Venom from Shang-Chi, so it's kind of an awkward card here overall. It will fuel up a Null, but ultimately I would say is like not the most powerful option in the deck. That's kind of where you get back a little bit into like in Infinite Conquest, the games might wind up being like a little bit softer, ironically. And then on the final turn, I think it's pretty obvious my opponent is just going to play a Null into Onslaught Citadel, and I can actually battle for a win in both of these other two locations. So I think that unfortunately for my opponent, this was like a pretty easy game for me despite them having a lot of the options. And I think if they like didn't have Negasonic in their deck and then also maybe played it a little bit better, they definitely could have won this one. But Obviously, there is some amount of skill expression too in Marvel Snap. We're able to get him back for 4 cubes. This last game, I just win by throwing down a Professor X into Valley of the Hand. Sometimes people will play into Valley of the Hand, but because they've already destroyed some things earlier on this game, they're kind of incentivized to not play to that location, or they could wind up filling that location. So they don't play to Valley of the Hand at all, which allows me to Professor X and turn off the location's trigger. And then I can turn off Throne Room with Reality Stone and also fetch something out of Lockjaw. But importantly, turning off the Throne Room will mean that I can catch them in the death location, and they have to double commit to Mojo World because whoever has more cards there is going to win, and they're going to assume that I'm going to play something there this turn as well. But then Reality Stone turns off death, so that alone is going to be enough, or turns off the Throne Room. That enough is going to allow me to grab the win in that location, despite losing in Mojo World. And then after that, they just concede. This might be the most important game of this entire video, and I'm eventually going to do a whole video just on this topic, but I figured I could at least start to address it in this one. It's a hard concept to get into. The idea that sometimes in Marvel Snap, the way that the cube system works, you actually get rewarded for making mistakes and losing. And that's exactly what we're gonna start off looking at here. I thought I was actually making a good play. This was not an intentionally bad play. My thought was, pull their Lady Sif into Space Throne. I've won that location. Did not think about Starlight Citadel. That means the worst location to make this play in is in the Space Throne, because now I'm not in the Space Throne. So now I have actually lost the actual Space Throne 6-5 over on the left side of the screen, and my opponent still has the ability to put cards into Onslaught Citadel. So don't know what I was thinking there. And really, there's only one way to salvage this game. I think about playing Professor X into Onslaught Citadel, but I'm already winning that location, and I'm definitely losing the Space Throne. So the only way I can win this game is by playing Professor into Starlight Citadel, which I think is actually pretty likely to win. If my opponent plays Hela this turn, I tie their Hela 6-6 in the center because I can move in Jeff, but they actually have Ghost Rider, which means I've now won in Starlight Citadel, and now all I have to do is win in Onslaught Citadel, which is trickier than you think. I would have rather my opponent played Hela this turn and played a bunch of cards into Onslaught Citadel that I could then Shang-Chi. Not going to be able to do that now. I'm just going to have to put a bunch of power into Onslaught Citadel while moving Jeff over into Starlight, and now I just have to hope that this is enough. So my opponent appreciating my variant of Professor X there, and not too disturbed that we got them with that card. They play 14 power into the Citadel. We have just enough. We beat them 23-22. Incredibly close game. My opponent would have won on differential had we tied, but I'm able to take them for 8 cubes. There's a lot of things to cover there, so I'm going to kind of talk about them while this next game plays out. So the concept at large is basically, I think that was a great example of it. I made a mistake. That gave my opponent the confidence to snap and stay in the game for 8 cubes. I think that if I had made a better play with Magneto, I potentially only get 4 cubes out of the ordeal, maybe even only 2. My opponent doesn't snap and then they retreat if I just grab a location win with Magneto. So in a very awkward way, Marvel Snap actually rewards you for situations where you lose or make a mistake that put you in a spot where you could lose. And I think that that's very interesting and just a wholly unexplored aspect of Marvel Snap overall. This game, we get a Tarnax, and with this Martyr pickup, it actually made me consider going for it because I opened up a Martyr avatar. I don't own Martyr, but I have the Martyr avatar, and I thought about battling for the Martyr avatar at the end of this conquest because when else are you going to get the opportunity to say that Martyr won you in Infinite Conquest? Just kind of silly. And then Reality Stone gives me Quantum Tunnel as location number 2, and Monster Island's great for me too because I've got Skaar in my hand. So overall, this is just like 3 really great locations to cap off this series. I just throw a bunch of stones into Quantum Tunnel. I feel like I can't go wrong there. I have priority as well, but my opponent doesn't even make a play this turn, so it doesn't really matter. And we're going to get Thanos off the Soul Stone. Psylocke is going... Oh, and that also cheapens the Skaar. Psylocke is then going to give me Professor X, which means I have now definitely won that location. And like Shang-Chi and Skaar, I'm feeling pretty dang good here. We've got 6 energy on turn 4, or I'm sorry, 5 energy on turn 4. So I'll just throw down Vision into Monster Island. I can move that Vision over into Tarnax as well. My opponent just plays a Ghost Rider over into that location with nothing discarded. It's going to give them Shuri. They're in it for 2 cubes. They don't have any opportunity to retreat or do anything fun here. And I just get to play Psylocke plus Skaar, Psylocke into Tarnax, and then Skaar and Power Stone over into Monster Island. And that will probably just be a Shang-Chi in that location to finish it off, though I could also play a Shang-Chi into Tarnax if they're able to get something big into that location this turn. Bucky Barnes fills the location for me, and Power Stone winds up filling the location for me because Lady Sif from my opponent, after discarding the Infinaut, turns into a Debris, which fills me up in Monster Island. But I am so far ahead that it just doesn't matter. I don't think there's any possible options that my opponent can do there. So I give them the fist bump back and I hit the end turn button, and that's going to be it. We're on to the finals. To kick this finals off, I do not have a great start. I would have loved to have had like any stone here. That would have allowed me to win in Castle Blackstone and then snowball from there. But I don't have anything, and my opponent, realizing that I'm a stoneless Thanos deck, just snaps on me, and I'm basically forced to retreat. My opponent is rocking the same avatar that I am, and I just realized you can't see it really on the screen. You can like kind of see it here, but I'm battling for this same avatar, and my opponent is actually not playing Thanos, but they are rocking the avatar. So a little bit of stolen valor here, and we've got to win it for Thanos. And now they are snapping on Camartage. I know nothing about their deck, but I get to play stones onto Camartage. I know that they aren't playing stones. They could very well have a location that works, or a deck that works very well with Camartage, but kind of so do I. So I'm willing to stay in it here. And it turns out they are playing a little bit of junk. They've got a Selene, and that double hits on my Psylocke, which is definitely a weird one here. And then I have the opportunity to play a double Psylocke this turn, but that would give me 5 energy next turn, and I don't think that that really helps me too much. So I think I will probably go for the Reality Stone, and I don't want to play Reality Stone onto Camartage despite my opponent snapping at that location. I don't want to get rid of it. I want to play Psylocke on it later on. My opponent uses the Hood to make a really tiny Hood, put them down to -7, and put 2 demons into their hand, and I Reality Stone center to grab a Hellfire Club. Now on turn 3, I'm going to be able to play Psylocke plus Time Stone. The Time Stone doesn't have to go into Camartage because it will fill up my hand, and I probably don't need 4 extra energy next turn, but ultimately I do decide to play the Time Stone into that location because like maybe the energy could help me play an additional stone or something. So we're just gonna run out the huge Psylocke. I'm basically saying I'm willing to lose Camartage because I'm assuming Annihilus is gonna give me the Hood, and the Psylocke is also a bunch of negative power. So I'm just willing to lose in Camartage. My opponent plays a pair of demons this turn, and we've got a whole bunch of extra energy here. I've got 8 energy, right? Yeah, 8 energy. Don't really have anything great I can use it on, but this is still like a reasonable play. Lockjaw plus Soul Stone, and then Caiera. And I think that Lockjaw might be able to battle for the Volt. and then I'm gonna have to blob into Hellfire Club on the final turn to try to win that location. Soulstone is going to turn into Jeff, so that gives me a little bit of flexibility, and then my opponent plays Sentry into Camartage, which is a powerful setup, but I just mentioned flexibility. I don't think that this is actually a very flexible play from my opponent. They're basically forced into playing Annihilus this turn, and we get to really get them here with Professor X. It was Professor off the top, so I do get a little bit lucky here, but it's Professor with priority because Sentry means that they have to lose priority, and that means that I just get to lock down the Vault. And with that, I think I'm ready to snap back. I can move Jeff into Hellfire Club, be ahead in that location by 8. The other reason my opponent has to play Annihilus this turn is they actively want to toss the Hood to my location. I'm not going to move Jeff to block the Hood coming over because then I'm still bunked in Camartage and it's the same endgame result. I do think they might have been better off playing Annihilus into Hellfire Club so they had a little bit of a lead in that location, but now without that, I have priority. Shang-Chi isn't going to work, but I am going to be able to just play a Skaar here. I actually do not want to play Magneto because I don't want to move over that Sentry. Is there like maybe a way if I had moved Jeff and then played Magneto? Possibly, but we're just gonna play it like this, and that's a pretty easy retreat from my opponent as we're able to get them for 4 cubes there and move on to the next one. Yeah, Professor X, I mentioned it at like the beginning of the second half of this video. Professor X is just really, really strong right now against a variety of different things, and if nothing else, I think that this video has been an excellent showcase that Professor X as a 5/1 is still fantastic, and I'm happy to play with my ink split Chibi and then white crackle Professor X. That's a pretty nice split there that I have. This game I make a pretty big mistake. The idea was let's Scorpion right, so that way we start filling that location in case my opponent plays the Void later on. However, I wound up playing Scorpion into Superflow, and also Scorpion is not that good against my opponent's deck, so this is a little bit awkward for multiple reasons, but I'm still going to follow up by continuing to play in Superflow, so that way I just blank my opponent from even being able to play the Sentry. So, thought this was an okay play here, and I actually am not super punished as a whole. The reason for that is my opponent was actually going to fill the Superflow for me this turn with a green goblin that now they will just play to the center, but it means that like, so they were going to turn off Superflow for me regardless. So now I can just like not feel that bad about what's happened. I played Cull into Superflow this turn, continuing my strategy of filling that location, and overall, I'm still feeling okay about the spot that I'm in. It's not fantastic, but it's okay. My opponent doesn't play anything on turn 4 because they want that energy from Superflow, and they want to keep the hub free so that way they can play Galactus in that location, and that's a gamble I'm willing to take. I'm going to play Lockjaw plus Time Stone into the hub, and I think this should be able to cancel out a Galactus and at least get me 4 cubes, because I think my opponent will have to retreat from here. It is definitely a little bit of a gamble, but I'm going to hit Shang-Chi, which is just barely enough to stop that Galactus that was shrunk by Scorpion. And because their Galactus did not activate, my opponent is going to decide that they had enough, and they are going to retreat and full concede in the final round of an Infinite Conquest. Kind of bold, but writing was on the wall. We were going to take them regardless here, and that allows me to grab my first Infinite ticket win of the season with my first Infinite ticket that I used, my only Infinite ticket, and that will give me this fancy border on this sweet Thanos avatar here. So there we go. I will claim that reward, and that's going to be it for me today. Thank you guys very much for watching. I'm NoLucksGiven. Peace.